So hello everybody, MIDI 2.0 got released now also on Windows 11, and in this video I will not only look at what are the current issues with that release and what the future will bring, but also have a look at some general news for MIDI 2.0, as well as at the end look at the tools that come with the application SDK of Windows 11 MIDI 2.0 and what you can do with it. So quite a broad band of info in this video, but let's dive right in. So first things first, the Media Association released some update info already end of last year, which I did not report about yet. So one pretty interesting info is that the Media Association changed their policy about giving out IDs for system exclusive. So this is pretty techy. System exclusive messages are for configuring devices, MIDI devices, and they are used to much more extent in MIDI 2.0, and basically each and every application which uses MIDI 2.0 needs a Sysex ID. And so far you had to be a member of the Media Association, which comes with a quite hefty price tag, and you need to renew this membership every year to keep using your ID. Especially for open source developers like I am, it's quite a hefty price tag, but there's now a new option. You can now pay a one-time fee of only $240, and I think that's much more doable. And there's also an option for non-commercial products which can use a fixed ID of 7C, which I need to look into more how this actually works, but this seems also to cover your basic needs. And there's also another ID if you just want to tinker around with these things or also do some internal research and not release a product. You don't have to buy anything at all or do anything at all. You can just use that ID for testing. So quite nice change. Another info they put out is about OpenWrt. You might heard of that. This is an operating system for many Wi-Fi routers, and you can also flash it on several routers which come with a different operating system. So a pretty widespread operating system for Wi-Fi routers. And the new update they had, they can now speak also MIDI 2.0, which is also cool. And you can also enable that feature in Linux, which means you can use your Linux computer together with OpenWrt to do MIDI 2.0 over Wi-Fi. So pretty interesting feature as well. But let's jump over to Windows 11 and the rollout. Even Microsoft tested a lot of things in advance, showed a lot of issues which were not known so far, as to be expected with all this gazillion of different MIDI interfaces and applications. But we see now much clearer what are the issues and what can be done about it. So Pete Brown summed up the current issues with MIDI 2.0 on Windows 11 quite nicely in this blog entry. I will also post again the link down in the description of the video, so you don't have to type in that long name here. And yeah, here's some of what's currently going on, and I can already tell you there are 2 updates planned for Windows 11, and the first one has already started to be rolled out now in March. And as usual, we don't know which computer will get it when, but it should happen in this month. And there will be another second update in April, so then the basic niggles should be fixed. And the first one to look into here is that we have issues with Loop MIDI, Loop BE, and everything that's creating loopbacks, also RTP MIDI. And this fix is expected the 4th week of March, it says. So this is one to go into, I guess, the April release. But I just saw today nerds.de, who's doing the IP MIDI and the Loop BE drivers, they released a fix for this problem, but it has one limitation. It decreases the number of ports you can create to 16, but nevertheless, this might help some people. So what else do we have? There is also an issue with WinRT MIDI timestamps, which affect some applications like Cakewalk Sonar, Cubase. And there is also a fix for that, which you can find again on the Microsoft blog. This is a little bit more tricky to install, but if you have that issue, I just want to let you know there is a fix for that. But as I said, it's a bit tricky to install, so you should not be afraid of tinkering with your computer. So, and then there are issues with drivers from M-Audio, Akai, and Rain, and so on. So every driver that's from InMusic branded, and they are currently looking into these issues with these drivers. The current workaround is to deinstall them completely, and if they are class compliant, it will just run nicely with a new MIDI 2.0 driver for class compliant devices provided with Windows 11. But there is one limitation normally with that. If they have specific applications to edit the configuration of these devices, they might likely not run. For example, I also have this problem with my iConnectivity devices, so my Mio 10 and Mio XL. They work totally nicely, but I cannot run their editor application. It takes ages to start up and then it simply freezes, and I reported this bug as well and hope that there is a fix for that. So you might have issues with the editor applications of these devices. Also, Akai is something I cannot run. I also have installed the network MIDI driver, which is necessary, for example, to use Automatic Driven by MOS tool with the MPC, so you can control Bitwig or Reaper. And I currently had to deactivate this because this driver will simply crash and freeze. And for example, in Bitwig, the whole software will hang and the audio engine will crash. So I cannot currently use that, and I hope that there will be a fix for that as well. So that's a minor issue that if you plug in some devices, they might not directly show up, but the fix is pretty simple. Do it before you start it up or restart the MIDI service, which is also be easily done. If you go into the MIDI configuration settings preview application, you can simply go on troubleshooting, and there you can say restart MIDI service, and then these devices will show up as well. Yeah, and then there's a big trouble with Korg USB devices because the driver is, sorry to say, but it's crap since years. And it always caused issues because it can only be at a certain position in the MIDI drivers list, and you had to reorder, and it's a nightmare. And now with this change in Windows 11, it crashes the whole MIDI service because they freeze and all this stuff. And they are talking to Korg as well, what can be done about it. And the solution is, again, if they are class compliant, simply use the Windows driver. If not, I'm not sure if there will be a solution for that. But if you uninstalled it, I already mentioned that in the last video, that it can screw up the driver configuration. And there is this little utility which comes with the application SDK with MIDI Fix Rec, which can fix your registry for that. But read that in detail. There is a really detailed explanation how to do that. So this might sound quite horrible, but nevertheless, most of the stuff is working. So it's not as bad as it sounds. You're mainly affected if you run Korg devices and some specific Akai or audio tools. And I already mentioned the update to the new SDK. So there is now version 3, and specifically it also had some updates. And the current version I run here is 1.0.16 RC 3.7. And if you enable developer mode on your machine, which I didn't do, you can also install MIDI 1.0 Loopback, so something like Loopbe, old style Loopback, which I think is not really necessary to have, but it might be necessary for some applications, but I'm not sure when you really need that. The basic difference is, which you might also have forgot about, as I did, because the MIDI 2.0 announcement was quite some time ago, The big difference between ports of MIDI 1.0 and 2.0 is that 1.0 ports only go in one direction, which you also see, for example, if you take a look at your synthesizer, it has a MIDI output and a MIDI input. So it means you need two cable for both directions. And that's a difference with MIDI 2.0. You only need one cable, even if it's a virtual one. So because this is reflected also in the OS, so also in the OS for MIDI 2.1, you need two ports if you want to communicate in both directions. So if you have a loopback endpoint in MIDI 2.0, you need to create two inputs and two outputs to communicate in both directions. And that's no longer necessary with MIDI 2.0. So if you create here a new loopback, for example, you see it also nicely explained here in this diagram. One port goes always in both directions. So much easier to handle than the old way. But nevertheless, if you need MIDI 1.0 loopbacks for any reason, you can also do that now. So enough of explanation. Let's have a look what you actually can do with the new tools. And before we look at the tools, let's have a look here at the nice user interface. We are getting now which lists you all your devices. And I already showed that in the last video how this works and that you can nicely monitor your applications here. And for example, here, let's monitor the polybrute, and if I press a key, I will see all the data here nicely listed, so you do not need a specific MIDI monitor anymore. You can simply click here the monitor button and you get it. But you can also nicely configure it a bit, which is something I always looked with envy on Mac OS, that it looked much nicer. So now you can click here, for example, let's say the polybrute, and you can assign an icon to the polybrute, which is quite nice. For example, here I downloaded a little picture of it, and now you have here the picture of your polybrute, and you can also add a description and a different name and so on. And now we see here the polybrute, and also in the list you directly see your polybrute. Pretty nice little feature. So, but let's have a little look at the command line. What tools are coming with that? So you find them here in your programs folder, Windows MIDI services, and there is a tools folder. And in the tools folder, there is the main application is the MIDI exe, which is also in your command line. So you don't need to give the path. You can simply type MIDI, and that's the most powerful of all the tools. It allows you also to create loopbacks and enumerate all the devices, which is also the tools which can be easier done via the user interface I showed you. But nevertheless, if you are a developer or want to get into the details, this is also quite interesting. So for example, let's do MIDI and endpoint enumerate, and then you can get all the infos or not. Endpoint properties, sorry. Properties, here we go, and then you get also this nice selection, so you can say, okay, I like to get more info about the polybrute, and then you get all the details about these parts. What might be also for some in-depth tinkerers is the time option, which shows you what is the timing on your machine, the Windows timer interval. So this might be also interesting to track down some bugs through that. Besides this main tool, there are also other tools also for backwards compatibility. So you can list the MIDI 1.0 devices. So have a look how they look and if they are, for example, converted nicely on this new system. And yeah, you get my huge list of MIDI devices and connections. And this might be also helpful to track down some bugs. You can also use a MIDI 1 monitor. So this uses also the old API then, which might be also helpful to track some bugs. So you first select your device. For example, let's say we have here the X-Touch extender, and I can go here pitch bend and the knob send CC and the button send some note ons, and this is also quite helpful, and press escape to close it. So what else do we have? The MIDI check service, I showed that already in the last video. This only checks if you actually have the new MIDI 2.0 service running on your system and if it's enabled. And this should be the case with all systems by now. Then there is a MIDI diagnose application, which also lists lots of information about all the ports in all the detail you can think of. And this might be helpful if you report bugs to Microsoft. MIDI Fix, we already talked about that, to get rid of cork drivers. MIDI KS Info gives you more info about USB devices which are connected, and this is the same for connected network drivers. So quite some helpful tools with that come now in this package, which you need to still install separately from their GitHub account. And also on the GitHub account, you find much more explanations about these tools if you want to look into them. So yeah, as I said, still some niggles here on Windows 11, but it's coming along, and I think all the issues are clear now, and there are roadmaps to fix them, and I think most of the stuff will work in a time frame of 2 months. And yeah, what do you think about it? Are you using it already? And until next time, make some funky music.